Now, if there's one word to describe the state of my existence, that word would have to be, I'm a restless person. Now, if you're observant, this is not my apartment. This is somewhere else, because yesterday was literally a whole day of unpacking everything or packing everything from my apartment because the lease is gonna expire in a month, and then unpacking everything into here. And this is basically an undisclosed location near the beach. You might come to see me riding a bike or swimming in the ocean in the coming days, but the city slicker chapter of my life is officially closed. Done. And of course I'll make more videos talking about this place, because this place is pretty fun, pretty incredible. And yeah, this is where we are now. But before we dive straight into today's topic on biographies and why you should read them and why they'll change your life for the better, here's a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Blinkist. In the age of information overload, there's so many books out there that we want to potentially check out, but we don't necessarily want to invest in a whole 4 hours just to reading one nonfiction book. And that is where Blinkist comes in. Blinkist is a service that's designed to deliver you key insights for nonfiction books in less than 15 minutes. So should you find yourself in a situation when you're choosing between two books, one of these books is a big, long piece of fiction that you're really interested in, and really want to dive deeply into this piece of fiction, and there's a nonfiction book on the side that you're like, man, I only just want to get the gist of this nonfiction book. Blinkist will only take away about 15 to 30 minutes of your time, and it's going to give you the gist of that nonfiction book, so you can spend however many hours reading that big piece of fiction that you want to read. And speaking of nonfiction books that surprised my pants off recently, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon quickly became one of my favorite books on creativity of all time. Because if you go and consult other sources on creativity, you're gonna get muddled up. If you read the history books of your favorite artists, well, there's a lot of misconceptions about creativity that we just simply don't understand yet in the modern age. Necessary to be a tortured genius? Is the creative method as mysterious as it sounds? And what is the proper way to go about being creative in the 21st century? So if you want a teaser or a condensed version of this book, it is certainly available on Blinkist. And as a lucky viewer of the channel, Blinkist is now offering all of you guys a 7 days free trial. And, of course, a 25% off, because why wouldn't you give people 25% off if they were watching your videos? All of that plus more if you follow the link in the description down below. And if you want to learn more about the creative process, this is the book that you should check out, either on Blinkist or in physical form. But nevertheless, thank you Blinkist for sponsoring today's video, and thank you Blinkist for condensing the amount of time that we're putting into reading nonfiction books. Back to the video. So without further jibber jabber, today's video is going to be about one thing. It's going to be about why you should read biographies and why I recently became quite obsessed with biographies. Now, literature is my lifelong obsession, and I continue to pursue that obsession as I get older, as I understand more of what this thing really is, this literature business. But then there are these in-between pockets where I'm not particularly interested in diving into something that's as heavy as like a classical novel, as heavy as Les Miserables, or diving into something as heavy as, you know, any of the books on that shelf right there. So I found myself recently wandering through bookstores and just grabbing random books that interest me. And by pure chance and by pure luck, I guess, I ended up in a very, very interesting genre called the biography. In fact, some of the most impactful books in my life, they were biographies. Steve Jobs' biography, which was my first biography ever, and of course, Walter Isaacson's Leonardo da Vinci. That book had such a profound impact on me that I have basically decided to align my entire life with it, to pursue this ideal of learning, this ideal of pursuing multiple interests at a time. And speaking of multiple interests, recently I have been reading a lot about this designer, this specific designer called Karl Lagerfeld. Lagerfeld is a German designer, German by origin, but like he traveled around quite a bit, and now he's dead. But before he was dead, he was in Paris. An incredible visionary, I would say, and just an interesting character in general. And he was the directing designer of Chanel for the longest time, you know, for over 20 years. So as someone who's particularly interested in the principles behind fashion design, or like the fashion industry in general, this book right here, Kaiser Karl, was just, man, I'm halfway through the book, and it is such a delicious read. And alongside Kaiser Karl, I've been reading Andy Warhol's biography. This one's a bit of a slower burn because, well, it's a bigger book. It's 900 pages on the life of Andy Warhol. And of course, the bookmark is a Polaroid of a skull from my friend Jaden's house. So just to really get that Warhol in there. So here's really the meat. Why? Why should you spend so much time learning about another person? Why shouldn't you just read everything to know yourself, know thyself, not any other people? I think the first principle here is that we have to realize that humans are basically selfish mother. We only really care about this. We only really care about ourselves, really. And if you can rationalize to yourself how like you care about other people, I'm a very virtuous human being. I'm naturally an empath. But at the end of the day, most of your time and energy are basically focused in on yourself. And of course, reading biographies, some people assign it a purpose of like, I really want to understand these people. I really want to understand these characters of the past. I really want to understand these very fascinating characters of history for its own sake. But as a bit of a younger guy, I think I have a more selfish motive. For me, it's so important for me to figure out who the hell I am ASAP. And it's probably the same for you if you're in the same age bracket. You're constantly trying to find out what it is that you want to do to better the world, what it is that you want to contribute to the world, what it is that you want to do as a career. These are constant questions. You can't just find an answer to these questions by sitting around and philosophizing a whole lot. Unless you go out and screw things up, unless you go out and create a bunch of stuff, unless you go out and fall in love and fall out of love, and then you make a mess and then you clean up the mess. That's basically the fastest way to really discover who you are. And in terms of biographies, because a biography is the closest freaking thing, is basically the most complete portrait there is to another person. And if you find that person interesting, if you on some level identify with the person, if you somehow relate to this person, then you're not really reading this book to know the other person. You're really reading this book to find pieces of yourself in this historical character, in this Andy Warhol, in this Karl Lagerfeld. And when you're young, and when I'm young, as a younger person, our lives are basically a series of aspirations. We want to be something. We want to become something. We want to create something that isn't there just yet. We're not so certain about who we are just yet that we kind of need this process of aspiration first. We kind of need this process of like, that is the person that I want to be. I want to be that person. So as you're going through these biographies, you're identifying characters that you want to be and characters that you don't want to be. And over time, there's this process of you adopting different personalities. It is kind of freaky. If you read about a person in a piece of biography, you're like, man, he's similar to me. And I think he's kind of cool. Let me become him for a week. And what's going to happen is that not 100% of that person is going to fit with you because you're your own person. And then whatever remains in your identity after you go through that entire period of, let me try this personality on, let me try to be this person, let me try to be that person. After years of doing this, these aspirational characters, they're going to slowly wear themselves out. And what you have left in here is your real identity, is your real personality. This combined with self-awareness, this trying on different costumes of different people that you want to be, this combined with a sense of self-awareness, this is like the fastest way to discover who you are, really. And discovering who you are is basically, I think, 80% if not 90% of personal development work for young people. A word of warning, when you're trying to discover yourself through this process of reading biographies, through identifying with these historical characters, through absorbing these personality traits exhibited by these historical characters, there is a tendency for us to get stuck right there. Now, this is who I am, I'm stuck here, and I'm not gonna change. The whole point of reading biographies, in my case, is to allow that falling process to happen, is to allow what isn't yours to fall away over time, combined with life experience and some of your extracurricular reading, whereas in reality, you really have to treat it as kind of like a movie, you know? Sometimes you walk out of a movie, for the first 20 minutes of walking out of that really good movie, you kind of turn yourself into the main character of the movie for like 20 minutes straight after you walk out of the theater, and then maybe 20 minutes later, life gets in the way, and then that sort of shell slowly melts away, and you slowly become yourself again. That self, after you've watched the movie, is not the same self anymore. There are lessons in there. There's like a new layer of self-discovery, and maybe the character really resonated with you. That's why you've had this urge to adopt the character's personality. After a while of this back and forth, after a while of this aspiration, embodying the aspiration, you're gonna end up with a pretty accurate sense of self-perception. You're gonna end up with a pretty solid sense of like, oh, this is what I am now. I'm not that, but I'm this. But this is informed by that. If I hadn't read all those biographies, if I wasn't applying this degree of self-awareness, there's no way I could have discovered this without that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I adore reading biographies. On top of literature, on top of philosophy, on top of history, and everything else that we've read on this channel so far. Nevertheless, those are my 2 cents on the subject, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.